Harry, you're here as well, and we're doing another What If. How's that sound? Are you happy with that? Are you good?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Well, last week...
Responses I can give to that, Tim. Like, what else am I going to say? No, that sounds like a horrible idea. Why are we doing this series?
Well, last week, Harry, do you remember that we spoke about what if Christopher Eccleston had returned to Doctor Who in Day of the Doctor, the 50th anniversary special? Do you remember that?
Barely. It's been a long week.
Well, if you don't remember it or you didn't watch it, go and check that out. There'll be a card up on the top screen. But this week, Harry, we're going to ask, what if David Tennant had stayed on for Doctor Who for Series 5? Harry, have you ever pondered that question?
Well, yes, because similarly to Chris being Dave the Doctor, that is something that seemed for a while to be what was going to happen. When Moffat first took over as showrunner, it was kind of just assumed that David would be going with him into Series 5. And we even know from Moffat that he originally planned for David to be the Doctor in that series.
Yeah, so I've got a load of notes here, and the first one I've got is David leaving the show after 3 seasons has sort of really set a trend in Doctor Who. Matt Smith, Peter Capaldi and Jodie Whittaker have all done 3 seasons of the show, along with a series of specials. So if you think about it, if David had stayed for an extra series, then this whole thing of, free and done, would have been a completely different outlook on Doctor Who.
But maybe no. The thing that I think is, I remember I saw an interview back from 2005, just before Chris's series came out, and it was an interview with Chris where he was asked about returning, and he said that to him, that full series that he did in length was sort of the equivalent to 2 series of Classic Who. And if you use that logic, that means that if David had done 4 series of Modern Who, that's the equivalent of 8 series of Classic Who, which I believe is the same amount as Tom Baker.
Perhaps. I don't know. I don't know so much the structure of Classic Who, but I also wonder, was that Chris very delicately defending a question he didn't really want to ask?
I think just using that kind of unit of measurement, thinking of a modern series of Doctor Who, at least at that time, as being the same length as 2 series, I don't think it would have particularly necessarily set into motion the idea of Doctors not sticking to the 3-year rule. I think it would have just meant that it would have solidified David in the new show as kind of being the modern equivalent to what Tom Baker was in the classic show, which was kind of the go-to actor people think of when they think of Doctor Who, which in a sense is what David Tennant still is.
Yeah. Okay, so it was announced in January 2009 that Matt Smith would be replacing David Tennant as the 11th Doctor, but at one point it looked like David Tennant might have stuck around for at least 1 more year on the show. So I've got a quote here from Steven Moffat. Speaking to the Doctor Who Fan Show 2017, Steven Moffat, the showrunner and executive producer of Doctor Who Series 5 to Series 10, said that David was going through the now very familiar angst about leaving. Piers Wenger, former executive producer, and I went to talk to David, and I ran him through what that series would have been if it was him. It would definitely have been his last. There was no question about that. So then, Harry, I'm going to ask you, what do you think of that, and what do you think about the idea that Moffat would have sort of written out the David Tennant version of the Doctor?
Well, I think that makes sense. With kind of Moffat taking the reins, I'm not surprised that he would want to kind of claim a bit more of a solid ownership on the show. I have kind of seen interviews with Moffat in the past where he's kind of said if David had stayed, the kind of transition from Russell era to his era would have been a lot less. I mean, obviously, we know with Series 5 compared to Series 4 and the specials, there's a very notable change, like everything from the logo to the intro to just how the show looks. There's a very notable change. And from what I've heard, it wouldn't have been quite as notable, and maybe Moffat would have hung fire on a lot of those changes until after David left, and it would have been much more of a kind of clean transition, which would have actually been interesting to see.
That would have been quite cool. I've got another quote here from Moffat. It says, my version of that series would be that the David Tennant Doctor would crash in the back garden about to regenerate, and little Amelia would help him back into the TARDIS and he'd fly off. And she'd meet him again, and when she grew up, he'd have no memory of that because we come to realise that was a Doctor from the future. We make our way through the series to the point where the Doctor gets back to that. I sort of use that idea again later. So that would have been the show, and he And he thought about it very hard, and he left me a message on my answering machine saying he'd thought very hard about it, and as I thought he would, he decided to move on.
I mean, I think it makes sense why David chose to leave when he did. He very much moved when he was in the show. It was Russell, the showrunner, and it kind of makes sense that he wanted to move on with Russell. At the same time, though, that's not the worst way to see his Doctor out. It's very Steven Moffat. It's very kind of like timey-wimey, a big timey-wimey plot thread. And it's kind of reminds me of what he eventually did with Series 6. You know, that starts with the 11th Doctor apparently being killed, and then the 11th Doctor from an earlier point in time appears.
Yeah, I like it. I feel like if David had stuck around, I mean, I love David. He's my favourite Doctor, and I would love to see more of him. But I feel if he had stuck around, therefore, the relationship between Matt Smith's Doctor and Amy Pond would not have been as strong, because that friendship that those two characters have really starts with the 11th hour. And I feel that you could therefore have treaded a very similar ground you did with the 9th Doctor, the 10th Doctor and Rose, if you then had the 10th Doctor, 11th Doctor and Amy. This sort of character who she fell in love with, and then he changes into Matt Smith, and it's this sort of readjustment thing, almost like Clara had to do with 12.
But that's based on the assumption that Amy Pond was fall in love with the 10th Doctor, because Amy Pond, I wouldn't say fell in
Everybody falls in love with the 10th Doctor. Everybody does.
But would Amy Pond? Because Amy Pond's like, I mean, the way that Moffat writes Amy Rory is, while there's a bit of a, what's going to happen in Series 5, it pans out that no, Amy truly loves Rory and Rory truly loves Amy, and no one could come between that, not even the Doctor. So I don't know if that is what would have panned out. Maybe Amy would have been a similar companion to Donna in that sense, the 10th Doctor, that she isn't completely swept away and caught up in the romanticism of the 10th Doctor.
It's a partnership I would really like to see. I've seen some fan art of Karen and David together, and it looks like a really good team up. So I would really like to somehow sort of see that. Big Finish, maybe do a What If series, that would be cool. But yeah, the whole of Series 5 and doing an extra series, what do you think to that then through David's point? Because this is all we know. This is all we know about Series 5 if David continued, and the series would have been broadly the same. But I feel that Series 5 and the stories that are told in Series 5 are very distinctly Matt Smith stories. I struggle to see another Doctor in there.
I don't particularly agree. I feel that you can kind of see in some of the ways that the 11th Doctor is written in... similarly to David Tennant in Series 2, I feel like Matt Smith in Series 5, all those stories are written in a sense where they're not really specific to Matt Smith, because obviously they couldn't really anticipate what sort of performance he was going to give. So there are certain episodes where I can see the 10th Doctor fitting quite naturally into it. And there are, I think, this is something, I said for David in Series 2, and I'll say it for Matt in Series 5, even though we've not got to it yet in the watch-along. There are certain bits where it feels like he's kind of falling into a bit of a safe performance area of doing a sort of, not a complete recreation of what the 10th Doctor's character was, but taking a lot of notes from it. And then as we got into Series 6 and onwards, similarly to David in Series 3 onwards, he really kind of came into his own as his own Doctor.